No, it wasn't until Pharaoh, some 2 years later, he himself had dreams, these dreams, and they were disturbing dreams. He looked to his magicians, he looked to his priests. No one could give him the interpretation of the dreams. And the butler who was next to Pharaoh as his cupbearer said, man, I remember my faults this day. I remember my faults. And by the way, this wasn't just some random circumstance that enabled him to remember. It was God bringing to his remembrance because God was working his plan. He said, I remember my faults this day. There was a young Hebrew boy in the prison, and he interpreted our dreams, and they came to pass just as he said. And so Pharaoh calls Joseph like we read. He cleans up, he shaves, he gets a new set of clothes, and there he is standing before Pharaoh. Now, I just want you to just think about how in that moment it all came together for Joseph, right? We're talking 14 years. 14 years of adversity, 14 years of victimization, 14 years of dealing with difficulty and feeling forgotten by your family, and maybe there were even moments where he felt forgotten by God, and now, listen, the picture's becoming clear, and he can say, God, this was what you were doing. This is what you had intended all along. Listen, it was an experience of the sovereignty of God in Joseph's life, and I want to submit to you today that Joseph always, consistently had anchored himself to the sovereignty and the providence of God. I don't think he ever lost sight. I want to tell you today that as Christians, we place our faith in God's sovereignty and his providence over our lives. Is that true for you today? Have you anchored yourself to the sovereignty of God? Well, you might be thinking today, what is the sovereignty of God? When I say sovereignty, I simply mean that God reigns over, right? Same letters in the word, just rearranged. Sovereignty means that God reigns over. Everything is under the dominion of God. Everything is under the authority of God. All things are subject to the power of God. There is nothing that is outside of his control or his dominion. God is absolutely sovereign in all things. The providence of God means that in God's sovereignty, he is wisely and graciously guiding our lives to fulfill his purposes. Do you believe that today? Yeah? Do you? Because sometimes, listen, sometimes I think we can ascend to the theological truth. We can say, hey, yeah, you know what, I do believe in the sovereignty of God. But you know, it's not just acknowledging the theological reality, it's also saying, and you know what, I trust that God is providentially ruling over my life. In other words, he is wisely guiding every single detail of my life. There is nothing that's missed by God. Like, you can't walk away from Joseph's life story and conclude that there are things that God just misses. There are things that God just doesn't know. In fact, I want to tell you today, your commitment to anchor yourself to the sovereignty and providence of God is going to hugely impact how you experience him.